What is existentialism? Its earliest themes dwell upon the human subject and upon the meaninglessness and the nothingness of human existence and the anxiety and the foreboding which result. Listen to the anxiety of Søren Kierkegaard, one of the forerunners of existentialism, who lived out his short life in Denmark in the first half of the 19th century. Kierkegaard says, "I stick my finger into existence. It smells of nothing. Where am I? What is this thing called the world? Who is it who has lured me into the thing and now leaves me here? Who am I? How did I come into the world? Why was I not consulted? The meaninglessness of my existence," says Kierkegaard, "fills me with anxiety and despair, with a sense of hopelessness and deep depression. The life of modern man is lived in despair," he says. "There is no one who does not have anxiety in the face of his existence." A year before he died, Kierkegaard summed up the agony of the beginning and end of life with these powerful words. He says, "Hear the cry of the mother at the hour of giving birth. See the struggle of the dying at the last moment of life. And say then whether that which begins and that which ends like this can be designed for pleasure." Human life is not designed for pleasure, Kierkegaard tells us, but in the time given to us, to each of us, for our own existence, the time between the birth cry of our mothers and our own final death cry, we strive for happiness in order to escape anxiety and despair. But there is no escape, no matter how pleasurable and comfortable we try to make our lives in order to hide from the truth. For the truth is, Kierkegaard insists, that all of us live in anxiety and despair. This is the universal human condition. We suffer from anxiety, even when we are not aware of it, and even when there is nothing to fear, nothing in the objective world to feel anxious about. This is because at bottom, says Kierkegaard, our anxiety is not objective at all. It is subjective anxiety. It is the universal fear of something that is nothing. It is the fear of the nothingness of human existence. Kierkegaard tells the story of an ordinary man who merely wants to be happy. But he is worried because he can't sustain his happiness. He keeps falling into depression. And he asks himself, is he getting older? Has he lost his drive? Is his world slipping away? But then he pulls himself together, and he makes something of himself. He gets ahead in his career, and he soon acquires a wife and family and social status in his community. But then the old depression comes back with even greater intensity than before. This man has made something of himself, says Kierkegaard, but he is a stranger to himself. He does not know that the way to overcome despair is to choose despair, to sink so deep into despair that you give up all the satisfactions and comforts of your life. You will lose all commitment to family, friends, and community. You will surrender reason and all belief in the truth of science and philosophy and all moral principles. When all these are lost, with nothing left, you will be in total crisis at the edge of the abyss, and you will be prepared then for faith in God. You will choose God and make the leap of faith to God. For Kierkegaard, only absolute faith and the leap to God can overcome the meaninglessness of your existence. And only the restoration of orthodox Christianity and the surrender of reason can overcome the sense of anxiety and despair for the solitary individuals of the modern world. But for Friedrich Nietzsche, who is usually regarded, along with Kierkegaard, as a forerunner of existentialism, Kierkegaard's religious solution to the problem of the meaninglessness of modern life is totally unacceptable. It is unacceptable to Nietzsche, first of all, because it represents the human individual as weak and powerless and even cowardly. It strips you, the individual person, of all human strength, so that in the depths of despair, your total loss of faith in yourself propels you into absolute faith in God to solve your problems in living. But Nietzsche would find Kierkegaard's religious solution unacceptable for a far more fundamental reason. Kierkegaard can be seen as the champion of the orthodox Christianity of the past, trying to solve the problems of modern man by turning the clock back to an older Christian absolutism, which requires the surrender of the self to God. But this is now impossible, says Nietzsche, because God is dead. The concept of the death of God is perhaps the best known of all of Nietzsche's many compelling contributions to philosophy. In Nietzsche's book, The Joyful Wisdom, Nietzsche represents the shocking story of a madman who on a bright morning lighted a lantern and ran to a marketplace to announce that God is dead. And Nietzsche writes, "We have killed him," cried the madman, "you and I. We are all his murderers." And then, thinking about the world in the absence of God, the madman says, "Do we not now wander through an endless nothingness? Does not empty space breathe upon us? Has it not now become colder? Does not night come on, continually darker and darker?" By the concept of the death of God, Nietzsche does not mean that God, who is defined as an eternal being, can nevertheless die. To say that would, of course, be illogical. What is eternal is like Parmenides' unchanging one. It does not come into being or pass out of being. By the death of God, Nietzsche means the death of our belief in God. It is our belief in God that is dead. It has finally succumbed to multiple attacks, including the savage beating it received from the empiricist David Hume, as we have seen. But if we have lost our belief in God, have we not lost the foundation of all our truth and morality? Did not even Descartes, that supremely independent rationalist, have to call upon God to guarantee that his clear and distinct ideas were true, and so to be the foundation of all truth? Is this not the crisis of the modern world, that in the loss of our belief in God, we have lost the foundation of our truth and value? Yes, says Nietzsche, but although man has lost the belief in God, this will enable him to lose his childlike dependency upon God. Humanity will now find the courage to live like adults in a world without God. The greatest need of civilization now, says Nietzsche, is to develop adults. It is to develop a new type of individual, to develop supermen who will be hard, strong, and courageous, and who will be intellectually and morally independent. These supermen will break the stone slabs on which the old Judeo-Christian moral laws are inscribed, those old moral laws to which the masses are still enslaved. The only morality of the superman will be to affirm life, to say yes to life, to be powerful, creative, joyous, and free. Kierkegaard counsels us to sink into despair so that we can make the leap of faith to God. Nietzsche counsels us to be masters, not slaves to God, and to be hard, strong, vital, creative, and joyous. And Nietzsche tells us why he rejects a philosophy of despair. He is afraid that it would destroy him. To Nietzsche, philosophies are not intellectual games or abstractions. Philosophies have the power to enhance and strengthen your life, and even your health, or to weaken and destroy you. And Nietzsche says that he created his philosophy of the strong, powerful, life-affirming Superman, as he says, out of my will to be in good health, out of my will to live. Self-preservation forbade me to practice a philosophy of wretchedness and discouragement. How did the profoundly divergent philosophies of Kierkegaard and Nietzsche prepare the way in the 19th century for the existentialist philosophy of the 20th century? First of all, Kierkegaard and Nietzsche, like Marx in the middle years of the 19th century, perceived the Western world to be approaching a time of crisis. All three, Marx, Kierkegaard, and Nietzsche, address their philosophies to the coming crisis. They offer a diagnosis of their own time and a prescription for what ought to be done. Secondly, both Kierkegaard and Nietzsche reject any diagnosis of the crisis which treats the problem as a collective problem, one of social or economic classes or of groups, as Marx did, or as a problem of nation-states, as Hegel did. For Kierkegaard and Nietzsche, and for the existentialism which follows them, the individual human consciousness is the only key to the diagnosis and cure of human problems. Existentialism maintains that in philosophies such as those of Hegel and Marx, with their exclusive sociological concern with social groups, social classes, and the social system, the individual human self disappears. It is swallowed up by the group. Thirdly, Kierkegaard and Nietzsche prepare the way for existentialism by rejecting, as existentialism will later reject, all past philosophies. Past philosophies have had no interest in philosophizing about human existence, and they have had no interest in the effect of philosophy upon the consciousness of the human subject. And lastly, Kierkegaard and Nietzsche share an intense and subtle concern with psychology, with mental states, and especially with neurotic and psychotic states of the individual. Like all the existentialists who follow them, they must be called psychologizing philosophers. They are subtle and sometimes masterful interpreters of the psychology of the human subject, who is the focus of all their concerns. Existentialism develops in the 20th century within Germany and France, not as a direct result of any specific set of circumstances or causes, but as a deeply experienced response to the crumbling of many structures in the Western world which had previously been regarded as stable. The eruption of World War I finally destroyed the belief in the continuing progress of civilization to peace and prosperity which the Enlightenment had fostered and which had survived until the outbreak of this war. With World War I, there came the collapse of the seemingly stable balance of power among the great nations. Before World War I had ended, there crumbled away the empire of all the Russias, and there soon began the crumbling away and collapse of the far-flung British Empire and the French, Belgian, and Dutch empires. The Communist Revolution of 1917 in Russia shattered the confidence in political stability, the confidence that the revolutionary era was now over. Economic structures also were perceived to crumble as the great economic depression of the late 1920s and 1930s rolled from Europe to the United States, raising doubts about the enduring truth of classical economics and doubts about the survival of capitalism. Science itself began to surrender its claims to certitude, and philosophies of all types were crumbling away. Inroads into the territory of philosophy were made by science. Furthermore, philosophy was under continuous attack from the empiricists, and increasingly, philosophies were charged with being historically relative, or even worse, with being ideologies serving a group interest. With the weakening and collapse of so many external structures of authority, authoritative economic, political, and intellectual structures, all these structures begin to lose their legitimacy. They begin to appear illegitimate and intolerably repressive and coercive upon the individual. The individual then responds by rejecting the external authority of government, the economic system, and the scientific and intellectual world, and turns to himself instead as authority. In this way, existentialists turn to the human self as the true center of philosophy. 20th century existentialism was following the path of 19th century German Romanticism. Like German Romanticism, 20th century existentialism rejected government, economics, politics, and philosophy as authorities, and centered philosophy upon the human spirit, the conscious human subject, as the only legitimate authority. What then is existentialism? There exists now a widely accepted definition of existentialism. It is that existentialism is the philosophic standpoint which gives priority to existence over essence. What is meant by this is that existentialism gives primacy or priority in significance to existence in the sense of my conscious existence as a conscious subject, rather than to any essence which may be assigned to me, any definition of me, any explanation of me by science or philosophy or religion or politics. Existentialism affirms the ultimate significance, the primacy of my existence as this flickering point of consciousness of which I am now aware, my here and now conscious existence, as against all efforts to define me, to reduce me to a Platonic essence, or to a Cartesian mental substance, or to a Hegelian carrier of the spirit of my culture, or to a scientific neurological mechanism, or to a social security number. Essentialism is the name sometimes given by existentialism to the mode of thinking which it opposes, to the mode of thinking which gives priority to essence rather than to existence. Essentialism is the mode of thinking which seeks to conceptualize me, to assign me to an essence, to fit me into a system, to analyze me by means of some technology. Existentialism, by contrast, existentialism cries out that man in his concrete existence as a conscious being has been neglected by philosophy, science, political organizations, and by religion. What of the life of the auto mechanic? What of the life of the college freshman, the dry cleaner's delivery man, the nurse, the shoe salesman? They are accounted for, explained, defined by philosophy, science, religion, and politics. But existentialism says that their existence as conscious beings is the significant problem. Their conscious existence is precisely the unseen and neglected problem. In our time, in the contemporary world, existentialism is that philosophic voice which is rising and can be heard in all the areas of social life, art, and learning. It is a voice which calls upon artists, scientists, philosophers, politicians, theologians to be concerned with the perceptions and feelings of the human subject, as against the standardized ways in which human beings are programmed and analyzed as if they were things. Existentialism may thus be seen as the champion and defender of the human spirit against the oppressiveness of mass society, against the oppressiveness of science, philosophy, and organized religion. Its concerns are narrow. Existentialism focuses solely upon human existence. Existentialism has no philosophy of nature or of science or of history. It is a philosophy of human existence, a philosophy of man. But how can one approach concrete human existence? If you try to discover human existence by sense perception, by observation, you will find that this is a trap, because sense perception does not lead you to the conscious subject. It leads you to observation, experimentation, empiricism, and to science. This is the scientific trap. But trying to approach concrete existence by reason turns out to be another trap. The route of reason leads you to essences, definitions, and rationalism. This is the old philosophic trap. What then is the path to my conscious existence? You can take the path of either crisis or of communion. A crisis is a happening which suddenly removes you from the ordinary context of your life. You cannot react at this point with your everyday habitual responses, and you are thrown back upon yourself, as when you find yourself in a blackout in Times Square in New York, or in a blackout in your room when you awaken in the night and sense someone standing close to your bed. Or there is the crisis in the crowded restaurant when someone at the next table chokes on food and begins to turn purple. At such moments of crisis, you become aware of your conscious existence with sudden, excruciating clarity. The other path to conscious existence is by way of communion, by way of the self-discovery which occurs at the moment of becoming one with a group. Self-discovery can happen at a time of ecstatic religious unity or of ecstatic political unity, such as what was produced by Martin Luther King's march on Selma, Alabama a few years ago. But how, then, can you present the discovery of the self in the experience of crisis or the experience of communion? One powerful way is by describing the crisis or communion as they were experienced. And this has led existentialists to literary description and to a great outpouring of short stories, novels, plays, biographies, and autobiographies. The other way is to philosophize, but to do so not with the traditional concepts of philosophy, but with new, strange concepts and themes such as existentialism uses: nausea, anxiety, nothingness, authenticity. Let us turn then to the themes of existentialism, the themes which may be said to characterize the mode of thought of those who would call themselves existentialists. First, there is the basic existentialist standpoint, which we have already considered. It is the standpoint that existence precedes essence, has primacy over essence. Man is a conscious subject rather than an object to be known or manipulated. He exists as a conscious being and not in accordance with any definition, essence, generalization, or system. Existentialism says, I am nothing else but my own conscious existence. A second existentialist theme is that of anxiety, or the sense of anguish. This theme is as old as Kierkegaard within existentialism. It is the claim that anxiety is the underlying, all-pervasive, universal condition of human existence. Existentialism agrees with certain streams of thought in Judaism and Christianity, which see human existence as fallen, and human life as lived in suffering and sin, in guilt and anxiety. Along with this dark and sorrowful picture of human life, there exists in existentialism the view that happiness, optimism, a sense of well-being, or the serenity of stoicism, these can only reflect a superficial understanding of life, or a naive and foolish way of viewing the despairing, the tragic aspect of human existence. A third existentialist theme is that of absurdity. Granted, says the existentialist, I am my own existence, but this existence is absurd. To exist as a human being is inexplicable and wholly absurd. Each of us is simply here, thrown into this time and place. But why now? Why here, we saw Kierkegaard ask. For no reason, and so my life is absurd. Listen to these words of Pascal, the great French mathematician and philosopher of Descartes' time, who was also a forerunner of existentialism. Pascal says, when I consider the short duration of my life, swallowed up in the eternity before and after, the little space I fill and even can see, engulfed in the infinite immensity of space of which I am ignorant and which knows me not, I am frightened and am astonished at being here rather than there. Why now rather than then? A fourth theme which pervades existentialism is that of nothingness or the void. If no essences define me, and if as an existentialist I reject all of the philosophies, sciences, and religions that attempt to give a specific structure both to me and to my world, then there is nothing that structures my world. I will have followed Kierkegaard's lead. I will have stripped myself of all structure, all human ties, all knowledge and moral value, and I will stand in anxiety at the edge of the abyss. I am my own existence, but my existence is a nothingness if all definitions, all truth, all structures are to be stripped away. I live then without anything to structure my life, and I am looking into emptiness and the void, hovering over the abyss in fear and trembling, and living the life of dread. Related to the theme of nothingness is the existentialist theme of death. Nothingness in the form of death, which is my final nothingness, hangs over me like a sword of Damocles all my life. I am filled with anxiety at moments when I permit myself to be aware of this. At those moments, says Martin Heidegger, one of the German existentialist philosophers, the whole of my being seems to drift away into nothing. The unaware person tries to live as if death is not actual. He tries to escape its reality. But Heidegger says that my death is my most authentic, significant moment. Nobody else can die for me. Death is my personal potentiality, and if I take death into my life and acknowledge it and face it squarely, I will free myself from the anxiety of death and from the pettiness of life. But here, the French existentialist Jean-Paul Sartre begs to differ. What is death, he asks. Death is my total non-existence. Death is as absurd as birth. It is not an ultimate, authentic moment of my life. It is nothing but the wiping out of my existence. It is only another witness to the absurdity of human existence. Alienation or estrangement is a sixth theme which characterizes existentialism. Alienation is a theme which goes back to Hegel and in many subtle forms. The most profound alienation of all in Hegel's thought was the alienation or estrangement between my consciousness and its objects, in which I am aware of the otherness of the object and seek in a variety of ways to overcome its alienation by mastering it, by bringing it back into myself in some way. As for Marx, we have seen that in the split between the two Marxisms, the young Marx is devoted to the concept of alienation in the sense of the economic alienation of the worker. How then do existentialists use the concept of alienation? Apart from my own conscious being, all else, they say, is otherness from which I am estranged. We are hemmed in, they say, by a world of things which are opaque to us and which we cannot understand. Science has alienated us from nature by its outpouring of overbearing and unintelligible concepts, laws, theories, technologies. These products of science now stand between us and nature. And the Industrial Revolution has alienated the worker from the product of his own labor and has made him into a thing in the productive system, as Marx has taught us. We are also estranged, say the existentialists, from human institutions, from bureaucratized governments on the federal, state, and local levels, from national political parties, giant business corporations, national religious organizations. All of these are vast impersonal sources of power which appear to have a life of their own. The individual can neither feel that he is part of them, nor can he even understand them. We live in alienation from our own institutions. Moreover, say the existentialists, we are shut out of history. We no longer have a sense of having roots in a meaningful past, nor do we see ourselves as moving toward a meaningful future. As a result, we do not belong to the past, to the present time, or to the future. And lastly, and perhaps most painfully, the existentialist points out that all of our personal human relations are poisoned by feelings of alienation. Alienation arises within the family, between parents and children, between the husband and the wife, and between the children. Alienation affects all social and work relations, and most cruelly, alienation dominates the relationship of love. These are the disturbing, provocative themes which can be found in contemporary existentialism. But now we must ask, if this is indeed the human condition, if this is a true picture of the world in which the human subject absurdly finds himself, how is it possible to go on living in it? Is there no exit from this nothingness and despair, this absurdity, this fixation upon death and alienation, this hovering on the edge of the abyss? Is there any existentialist who can tell us how to live in such an absurd and hopeless world? Is there an existentialist ethics, a moral philosophy to tell us what is good, what can be said to be right or wrong in such a meaningless world? For the ethics of existentialism, we will turn next time to Paris and to the existentialism of Jean-Paul Sartre.
Pre-recorded in the studios of the Maryland Center for Public Broadcasting.